This past weekend, there was a UFC event, UFC Fight Night, Strickland versus Imavov. Bear in mind, Strickland was a late replacement as Kelvin Gastelum's face took quite a bit of damage in practice. And Sean Strickland, who who fought mere weeks ago in a losing effort against Jared Cannonier, he stepped up and stepped in against the rising Nassourdine Imavov. And Sean Strickland got it done this time, defeating Imavov by unanimous decision. The scorecards reading 49-46, 49-46, and 48-47. Omar, let me start with you this time. What was your reaction to Mr. Strickland getting in the win column this time in another 5-round decision?
You know, it was a good performance, but I have to keep in mind that I've fallen asleep twice trying to watch this fight. I don't know what it is, man. I don't know if it's, he looked more aggressive in this fight than he did in his last fight, but there's something about him not really going for, or seemingly, because I don't want to assume he's not, and maybe he is, and he's just not great at it, but seemingly not going for a finish. He gets these guys in these situations where they're kind of royally screwed. In this situation, I thought it was interesting that round 5 went to Imavov. I thought Imavov was able to come back in round 5 and at least kind of empty the gas tank there. I didn't think he had anything left, to be honest. I saw him kind of gassing kind of in the middle of that fight. But Strickland, I think, was the one who ended up taking his foot off the pedal in that last round, which I thought was a little uncharacteristic from him, if I'm not remembering things properly. So kind of some weird occurrences in that fight, but I think Sean Strickland did fight the fight correctly. I thought he kept a heavy pace, made Imavov very uncomfortable, kept him on his back foot almost the entire time. And Sean Strickland did what Sean Strickland does and just kind of outworked him. Yeah. I just think once we got to the 5th round, either Sean Strickland knew he was good, banked on the fact that he was good, which is a dangerous thing to do considering how some of his recent decisions have gone. But 5th round just wasn't his to win, but he had already had, in my opinion, 4 in the books.
Mark, what about you?
Yeah, this went more or less how I imagined it would go. Maybe not exactly which rounds were which, as Omar said, which I'll touch on too. But you got to appreciate what Sean Strickland brings into a cage. Like, the man just wades into close range again and again. He has his head straight up, and he just kind of bar fights you. Like, I know there's a lot more that goes into his game than that, of course, but like the appearance of the way that he fights, it isn't a pretty game. And he's just so good with his head movements and at understanding how he has to move to be just on the outside of punches and at blocking with his hands and with his arms that he can kind of stay there standing straight up, looking kind of, less polished than a lot of these other fighters we see look. And it's because he's more polished, like in the subtleties almost of the fight. And they say he spars every day, so I'm sure that's part of it, and that's kind of why his game looks the way he does. But he's really interesting to watch. And then he's so good at angling shots in ways that are awkward enough to get through. And there are a lot of guys with prettier technique that can't hang in the environment that Sean Strickland brings. And Nassourdine Imavov was one of them. He, like Omar said, he was on the back foot the whole fight. He couldn't adjust. He let it be Sean's style of fight. And he just couldn't hang. There was the 2nd round you could argue maybe went his way. And then the 5th, I believe, did. But 1, 3, 4 were certainly Sean, and I kind of feel like 2 was Sean as well. It was funny because the cardio did end up being a factor. Like, Strickland was certainly not fresh, but he was able to push through. And then, I do think he got a little tired finally in the 5th, whereas on the flip, I think Imavov was too concerned with his own cardio in the pace that he was being forced to fight, that he was trying so hard to make sure he made it the whole way. And then finally in the 5th, he was like, all right, I can let it go. And he actually fought the way he should have been fighting the whole fight long. And maybe he had more in the tank than he realized he did, because that was the best version of Imavov we saw in that fight was 5th round Imavov. But it was obviously too late at that point, and he couldn't find a way to get going against Strickland's game prior to that. So it was a really good short notice win for Strickland. Great way to bounce back right after a tough loss, and he's basically right back in the mix.
Back in it. Yep.
Yeah, I've said this before, and I'll say it again, and I'll say it probably many more times. There are guys who are game planners, and there are guys who are, this is the way that I fight, and you can try to adjust to me. Sean Strickland is the latter. Sean Strickland, I'm interested. Omar, you said that you felt like he was more aggressive in this fight. Watching it, I'm like, he's fighting like Sean Strickland. He fights the same in every fight.
Well, yeah, his last fight
Yes.
though, the one before this, the Jared Cannonier fight. Simple example: Sean Strickland threw kicks in this fight. Just even a slight change in that regard. I thought he was just a bit more aggressive, a bit more versatile. I thought he fought as much as he's still Sean Strickland. You can't change Sean Strickland, but he did more Sean Strickland in this fight, I think, than he did in his last fight. I feel like he was a bit more normal in this one than we saw in the Jared Cannonier fight.
Yeah,
Agree. I think he was a little dialed back against Cannonier for whatever reason, and he looked more like we are used to him looking here.
Yeah. I will say the thing that's very interesting about Strickland's striking is his striking is almost meant to disrupt and not necessarily injure or hurt or stop in terms of power. And I think that's why you saw Imavov so uncomfortable for so long, because anytime you're trying to get any rhythm, here's something from Strickland. Something's popping him in the face and messing up his rhythm. And he's continuously trying to reset, find that rhythm, find that area that feels comfortable so he can throw some sort of combination or throw something back. But he's so good at just continuously keeping that pace and that disruptive rhythm that it's something that screws a lot of people up. On the flip side, the man has so many holes in his defense that somebody at some point, I feel like, has to see it and has to take advantage of it.
I mean,
he's got a Vic
just
chin.
Just did.
Well, yes, he's got a Michael Vick chin or a James
Vick,
maybe Michael Vick too. Who knows? But a James Vick chin.
Way better at his way of leaning than Vic ever was.
Yes, he's got a nice Philly shell kind of thing, but he relies on that lean so hard that honestly, one nice step in from somebody skilled is going to lay him the fuck out. Period.
Yeah, and we've seen it. Yeah.
So
Yeah, to your point, he throws so many shots that have no chance, no matter how clean they connect, of remotely stumbling you. But there's still shots where you're just like, fuck, I don't want to keep getting hit in my face. And you can't adjust to the weirdness that he's just kind of peppering you with.
Yeah.
And damage does accumulate. You're not going to get knocked out, but the shit hurts, and it doesn't not hurt any less throughout the fight. It just gets worse.
I'm not saying none of his shots. Obviously, he throws some shots that have the power, but he throws these kind of shots sometimes, and just weird. He just keeps his fists in your face.
Yeah, he's always trying to touch you, always trying to make contact with your body, give your body something else to react to mess up whatever it is you want to feel out. Yeah. He's a very annoying fighter when it comes to that.
But the skill that he brings is this, because there are fighters that are pressure fighters, and there are fighters that are quite conservative and safe. He somehow is both at the same time. He is an aggressive fighter who, like Mark alluded to, he wades forward. He's constantly the one who's trying to put you on the back foot. He's constantly coming at you, and he's a pressure fighter. But at the same time, he's also very safe and very conservative at the same time. He doesn't expose himself. He doesn't put himself in compromising positions for the most part. He fights and sort of he comes at you with the Philly shell somehow at the same time. Yeah. It's a very interesting and tricky formula for a lot of guys to try to figure out.
That's what I was kind of alluding to earlier. He's hard to hit in a way that doesn't make sense based on the style that he fights.
Totally.
One example of somebody who fights an aggressive pressure style would have been somebody like a Cain Velasquez or a Daniel Cormier. Yeah. And while you could see that kind of pressure being similar, the way they get it done, I think, is very obvious, is night and day different, right? You're not going to see Daniel Cormier pitter-pattering like that all day. He might throw a couple, jabs in your face and kind of get to the pawing, but Daniel Cormier is trying to lay somebody out, and so was Cain Velasquez.
Yep.
And also, they're trying to get inside and get a hold of you, whereas Sean is kind of just trying to live there without necessarily getting a hold of you.
And we've seen Sean Strickland use his ground game a lot more in the past. He's gotten away from it, I think.
He teased it a couple times in this fight, but it was more just to dictate where they were going to be, kind of.
Yeah. Yeah, he's got a good ground game, though. He should probably use it more.
Yeah, no, he does. I agree.
Okay, Sean Strickland back in the win column. Mark, where does he go from here? Put on your matchmaker hat, and what would you do with Strickland next?
So I kind of think he could find himself in a big fight. And the reason I say that is because so much of middleweight is booked. If we're still assuming that we're going to be looking at a Pereira versus Izzy title fight, you got that. Vettori and Delice is booked. Brunson and Duplessis is booked. Andre Muniz is booked. It kind of leaves me thinking that one of two things happen. One being Robert Whittaker needs a fight since Paulo Costa did not work out. And it feels a little wild to give Sean Strickland that fight considering he just lost his last one. But it was a very contentious loss, and it was to Jared Cannonier, who we've already seen Robert Whittaker beat. So it would not shock me if Sean Strickland kind of stumbles into being given a Robert Whittaker fight. On the other side of that is the man who just pulled out of that Robert Whittaker fight because of his contractual situation and whatever is Paulo Costa. And the Whittaker fight is such a big fight that I get he was like, no, like I don't want to do this. My contract needs to be right. Whereas Strickland, I could see him being like, you know what? This is an easier fight, and I want to get out of my contract, so I will take this one, and I will beat him, and I will get out of here. Like, I could see that being the Costa thought process. So I could see Strickland kind of ending up in either of those very high-profile fights all of a sudden.
Omar, you got any other names for me?
Yeah, I had this feeling that if Izzy doesn't take a fight with Pereira at a time that they want him to take a fight, because now things have gotten a little weird with a lot of these fights falling off of the map, I don't see it being unreasonable for Robert Whittaker to step in against Alex Pereira before Izzy gets a rematch. If that were to happen, I wouldn't mind seeing Marvin Vettori versus Sean Strickland.
Okay.
Or, in that case, Izzy versus Sean Strickland, because they already have a history of talking
That's what I
shit
thought
to
you were
each
going to
other.
say.
I mean,
Izzy,
yes.
wow.
Marvin Vettori, I think, just because I think that's, I don't want to call Vettori a gatekeeper, but I do think for the top five, it might, in a division this stacked, I think it's kind of warranted.
Yeah. Well, remember, he's fighting your boy Delice.
Oh, is he? Did I mention it? I can't.
Dude, you're the fight announcer.
That's all I did, though. I announce it and it goes out. So if that is the case, then I think a fight with Izzy would be great, especially considering the backstory, right? The shit talking they've been talking before.
Sure.
Strickland's probably going to spend the next 2 months, if that happens, talking about how quote unquote queer Izzy is and he fucks cartoons and all this other nonsense. And then Izzy's going to spend his time talking shit to Strickland. And then they're going to throw down and they're going to see. And I think it's going to be fantastic. So I'd be here for it.
Dude, I think Vittori's a phenomenal matchup for Sean Strickland.
Oh, I agree.
I've been wanting to see that fight. Yeah, I agree.
I wonder if Vettori would fold to that pressure. Because in my head, I don't think he would. But Strickland has done some crazy shit.
Okay, moving along. Taking a look at the loser here, Nassourdine Imavov. Omar, staying with you here at middleweight. If you were the matchmaker, what would you do next with Imavov?
Fucking give him Kelvin Gastelum when Kelvin Gastelum's tooth is healed.
Yeah.
Just give him. He didn't do nothing. He's not going anywhere. Just give him Kelvin Gastelum and let's get back on track here.
I was going to say the exact same. I think you can easily still make that fight. I still think it works, makes sense, the whole deal. If we can't get that fight for any reason, I also could see Chris Curtis being a fun option.
Oh, that would be fun. Teammate of Sean Strickland.
Yeah, that's another one that fights kind of the same way. That shit, man, Imavov is not going to get any breaks here.
Yeah, Kelvin is one of these guys on the roster who I don't trust to make it to the cage.
Who does?
Nobody, man. And he's so talented.